Following an unexplained disappearance, it's easy to assume the worst. But statistics show us that the chances of missing persons not being located are very low. In the UK alone, just 1% of adults who disappear are missing for longer than a month. Just because someone has vanished doesn't necessarily mean that something sinister is afoot. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 strange cases of people who disappeared and then reappeared. Richard Hoagland. Linda Easler recalled that her husband, Richard Hoagland, was a spontaneous, successful, and fun man to be with. The couple had tied the knot in 1982, and by all accounts, they lived a good life. They had a steady income, a big house in Indiana to raise their 2 children in, and went on trips to exciting, exotic locations. But while for Linda, things were the best there'd ever been, it was evidently different for Richard, as his 1993 disappearance would show. On February 10th that year, Richard called Linda while she was at work and told her he was so unwell he needed to go to the ER. She told him to wait and she would go with him, but he told her that he couldn't. In the following hours, Linda phoned around local hospitals looking for an update on her husband, but he hadn't been admitted to any. When she got home, she discovered that nothing was amiss. His toothbrush, ID, and clothes had all been left behind. He hadn't even taken a jacket despite the cold weather. Richard left behind not just his wife, but their 2 sons, 9-year-old Matthew and 6-year-old Douglas. That summer, both children received birthday cards with $50 inside. Doug's card read, "Maybe sometime soon we will get to see each other. I bet I won't even know. It has been so long. Mind your mother. Bye, Dad." Despite this, cards from their father were not regular. Matthew recalled, "Initially you think, okay, this won't last long. He'll be back." But for decades, the family never saw Richard again. Shortly after he vanished, authorities discovered Richard's car abandoned at Indianapolis International Airport, but there was no record of a Richard Hoagland on any of the flights, and his passport was found at the family home. With Richard gone, the family were left to struggle. They lost their cars and house, and Linda's mother was forced to step in and help financially. Linda turned to selling what her husband had left behind, including his designer suits. She recalled how heartbroken she felt, noting, "He devastated us. He left us with nothing, absolutely nothing. I was very broken." She also wondered, how do you walk away from your own children? How do you turn your back? In 2003, 10 years after his family last saw him, Richard was declared dead. Linda moved on with her life and eventually remarried. For 23 years, the whereabouts of her former husband remained unknown. It wasn't until the summer of 2016 that he was finally located when a woman named Cynthia Budznak discovered during a genealogy project that a flurry of activity was taking place under the name of her dead brother, Terry Szymanski, a fisherman who'd passed away in 1991 during a boating accident. It stated that Terry had gotten married 2 years after his death, and he had a child. Following the discovery of this activity, she tipped off the police, who soon discovered the real identity of the man posing as Terry Szymanski, and everything was revealed. Richard was living in the small town of Zephyr Hills, Florida, where he'd remarried, purchased property and a plane, gained his pilot's license, and had another child, all using Terry's identity. Investigators determined that after fleeing Indiana and his family, Richard had journeyed to Florida, where he'd rented a room from Terry's father. During his stay, he listened to the older man tell stories of his deceased son, and ultimately discovered his death certificate and stole it. He used it to apply for a birth certificate, and was then able to get a driver's license and establish himself as Terry Szymanski. Authorities also discovered that his new wife had noted that there were questions she had about his past, but he would always come up with a reason or an explanation. Though Richard was approached by investigators, he initially maintained that he was Terry Szymanski. It wasn't until they produced Terry's death certificate that he finally came clean. His new wife and child were shocked by the revelation that he wasn't who he said he was. Richard claimed that he'd disappeared because of family issues with his wife and children. Richard, who was 63 at the time, was soon arrested on several charges, including identity fraud. He pleaded not guilty at first, but he eventually changed his plea to guilty. He served almost 2 years in federal prison and returned to Indiana upon his release. In 2018, he was ordered to pay nearly $2 million in child support back pay, though Linda and her 2 children don't believe they will see a penny of it. His oldest son, Matthew, stated, got carried away and over his head in something. He added that he has a ring of his father's which he wears every day. Quote, but I think I wear it to remind me of a bad example. Sherilyn Barnes. 17-year-old Sherilyn Barnes was last seen in the town of Bushnell, Florida on January 3, 1996, when she was on her way to school. When she didn't return home that afternoon, alarm bells began ringing for her grandparents, who noted it was out of character for the teen. In the following hours, authorities began searching for Cheryl, eventually discovering that she'd taken out $100 from her bank account at an ATM. This led investigators to suspect that someone had taken the 17-year-old. For days after she vanished, it was found that she had turned up at a church in Pennsylvania, but she gave the pastor a false name. Authorities later asked for help in locating her through the TV show, America's Most Wanted. For weeks, nobody knew what had become of the teenager, but in early February, investigators gathered their first clue in the case. When New York City police discovered her car, a 1988 Mazda, abandoned in Manhattan. The vehicle was towed after illegally parking near the Empire State Building, but days passed before the link was made between the Mazda and the missing teen. On February 7th, however, another break came when TV news reports on her case aired and included Cheryl's photograph, a nurse who worked at Beth Israel Medical Center in Manhattan. Immediately recognized her as a nameless teen girl she'd been treating at the hospital. Cheryl had come into the hospital after she was discovered in the city, sitting in a snowdrift, wearing a bulletproof vest. She was unconscious, and hospital staff were relieved when she finally came to. She was disoriented and unable to recall how she'd come to be in New York, or even her own name. Staff simply dubbed her Jane Doe until she was finally found and identified by authorities. After she was located, Cheryl was returned to her family, but still suffered from memory loss. It's unknown what she'd been doing in 2 of the 5 weeks that she was missing. 3 were spent in the psychiatric ward of the hospital, where doctors described her as suffering from a type of amnesia triggered by psychological trauma. Though allegations surfaced shortly afterwards that she'd been sexually abused by